Welcome to Activate Worcester, folks. This is our first show of the year, I think, and it's a really, really special one. What we have going tonight is two-thirds of the band is back, at least live, as you can see. Ron Motta, I was one of the original founders. Chris Pinto, who you know, also an original. But we have a host emeritus with us tonight, our old friend Sandy Williamson from Georgia. How are you, Sandy? How you doing?
Well, if things weren't so cold down here to remind me of Massachusetts, things would be better.
Okay, cold. Tell me, how cold is cold?
Well, around freezing.
Oh, that's cold for you boys, that's for sure.
I won't be able to play golf in the morning.
Oh, God, give me a break. We could play ice golf up here or something. It's just been special. Just to get the banter out of the way, congratulations on the national championship with the Bulldogs crushing Bama Lama, which is what they did, and deservedly so. And I think you had a baseball team down there that did pretty good recently too, and it's becoming a sports hot zone for you guys. Unbelievable.
But I still haven't gotten over what those Braves did when Burdett beat my Yankees 3 games in the 57 series.
That's going back a bit, but believe it or not, I'm old enough to remember it. Like you, I'm a student of history. That's for damn sure. But yeah, for sure, it's been a while. But guys, I have to tell you, the reason that we had Sandy on today, in addition to having every now and then he'll grace our studios with a little visit like this. But the key thing is there's an awful lot going on in our country and an awful lot going on in Georgia. And those two trains are really pretty much together, if you will. And one of the things we wanted to discuss, because it's, I think, critical to everybody that's listening to this show, is the supposed voting rights legislation that's being championed from on high, because of all the quote-unquote voter suppression that has been in evidence, quote-unquote. And Sandy has some observations he'd like to share with us on it. So feel free, jump in, guy.
Well, there's, the one place I could start is when last week President Biden and his vice president showed up down here in Atlanta to harp on what they are calling Jim Crow 2.0 and all the bad things that go on in Georgia and other states that since the 2020 election have passed voter integrity laws to tighten up the voting systems and make, and we've all heard the terms, easier to vote and harder to cheat. And that's frankly what's going on there. And when we heard what President Biden had to say, I don't know, he kept on pounding on several different things, and I'm not going to go through them. But once he got done with the introduction where he said, hi, I'm Joe Biden, everything after that he said about voter suppression and new voting laws and all that were just outright lies. So
bring it down if it's easier for you.
And that's not just about Georgia voting laws, that's about any number of other states. And for instance, it's pretty straightforward if you look at the voting laws in Georgia and you compare them to the laws in Biden's home state of Delaware or New York State or any number of other blue states. The voting laws in Georgia are far more generous than those states. So if they're going to complain about the laws in Georgia and other states, they need to clean up their own act first, and then we can talk about it. But there's nothing in the laws in Georgia that prevents anyone from voting. There's nothing that suppresses anyone's vote. And if you look at the actual voting data over the last 8, 10, or 12 years, in Georgia at least, the percentage of folks that are voting continues to increase in every single demographic category. And in some of the elections, the minority percentage of voters actually is far greater than the white vote. So it's just all misdirection and obfuscation as far as I'm concerned. And I would be happy to talk to President Biden and go through every one of his points and show him how far wrong he is.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, it seems that voter suppression has been a Trojan horse that they've been trotting in for many, many, many years. Okay?
Yeah, but the horse doesn't even have a saddle on it.
That's well said, well said. We've heard of, while you were here in Massachusetts, and you're out of here, what, 10 years now? Pretty close to it, 7, 8, whatever.
We actually made the final move 8 years ago, but I was kind of in transition. We had property down here in Georgia before that, knowing we were going to retire here. And I was on airplanes to Asia most of that
I remember.
That 2-year transition period.
Well, I guess the thing of it is, you go back to the Bonnie Johnson things where people were saying, oh, there are people that are out there that are making it difficult for people to vote, okay? And as you know, I've been actively involved as a warden for many, many years, and before that, an inspector, and before that, an observer, and so on and so forth. And I believe
Ron,
personally very strongly in the integrity of the vote. And
the last time that I worked the polls in Worcester, I brought my own computer
I remember.
so that I could help people find their correct polling plates, because the geniuses in City Hall didn't have enough communications equipment to properly run the election. And guess what? Those geniuses in City Hall were not a bunch of Republicans by any stretch.
Mm-hmm. They were non-denominational, not sectarian. But the thing of it is, since then, by the way, just so you know, we now have all of that information right there. So you were, on cutting edge as you always have been. But the point being that even back then, when I kept hearing, oh, there's all this undercurrent of people being in some way not allowed to vote, one of the things that everybody is aware of, and have been for the last 10 years or more, is that everybody has one of these little suckers that they're walking around with. And yes, it looks like a cell phone, and it is a cell phone, but it's more than a cell phone, it's also a camera. Nowadays, any move that you make is recorded for posterity, which is embarrassing to a lot of people, I guess, but that's too bad. So if there were any incidents of people not being allowed to vote, man, first of all, it would be recorded, and secondly, it would be on all the alphabet networks that same night, and rightfully so, rightfully so. The only incidents that we've actually seen on camera was in Philadelphia several years ago, where they had individuals that were trying to, a couple of big fellas who were trying to intimidate white voters as to not voting in certain precincts. That is on recorded. It's on YouTube for everyone to see. We don't discuss that, though. Instead, we have these allegations, just like the allegations against Trump and his allegiance to Putin and Russia, okay? All smoke, no substance. Incredible. So they had that going. Recently, very recently, one of the interesting quotes, and I believe this came from Biden, was it's not so much who does the voting, it's who does the counting. That's where the real power is. And if my memory serves me correctly, that came straight out of Stalin. Little Joe, that was his whole spiel, if you will. You vote any way you want, we'll do the counting. And you know what happens when they do the counting. So, getting back to our friend, our president, quote unquote, bringing up a red herring like the Jim Crow is absolutely disgusting. And basically, what they're saying is if you don't vote his way, if you don't vote Democrat, then you're a racist and you support Jim Crow. In fact, take a minute or two, just give us some updates or recollections as to what Jim Crow was really all about. What did it really mean?
Well, Jim Crow had its foundations at the end of the Civil War, just like the KKK. And those laws were brought into being by the Southern Democrats. And they basically did suppress the vote. There was poll taxes, there was tests you had to take a test in order to be able to vote, and all sorts of other interferences other than, all you really need to be is an American citizen with, sufficient time in the district that you're voting in. And that's it. And I see time after time now, the things that the Democrats are continuing to whine about, like voter ID, something on the order of 80% plus or minus a few percentage, depending on whose poll you want to quote, 80% of American citizens are just plain happy and think we ought to have voter ID in order to cast a legal vote. And that number is consistent across all demographic groups, including blacks and Hispanics. So it's that kind of support for solid election laws is, an American thing. And for it still escapes me how anyone can get on the other side of that argument and say, nah, you don't need to prove who you are to vote. That's just, you got to prove who you are to buy a pack of cigarettes, for God's sake.
Or to get a vaccine. Or to get a vaccine.
Yeah, or, to do almost anything of any kind. Open a bank account lately.
Very, very true.
It's all just pure silliness and obfuscation, to use one of my favorite words.
It's all that, and they're using that, as I said before, as a Trojan horse to cover what they really want to have, which is to have this absurd voting rights legislation approved. Tell us what you know about the voting rights legislation that they're projecting. What will that include?
Well, here in Georgia, there was a significant additional tightening of the law after the 2020 election to, frankly, tighten up some of the gaps. And some of the things that were done in the 2020 election that our Secretary of State agreed to do based on a lawsuit from our almost Governor Abrams were patently illegal in the first place, because they never got, those changes to the voting laws never got passed by the state legislature. So you can't, doesn't matter whether the Secretary of State says it's okay, or some judge says it's okay, or even if the governor says it's okay. It ain't okay if it's not in black letter law. Sorry about that.
That's right.
So all the stuff with the drop boxes and no signatures and all that, that's all been tightened up. They had mail-in ballots where you didn't have to match the signatures on the envelopes with the signatures on file. Are you kidding me? How can that's, there's no ID requirement there. And there's a whole other, there's a whole laundry list of things where they said, no, You're going to have to match the signatures. No, the mail-in ballots we already had voter ID here in Georgia, but the mail-in ballots didn't even require any form of ID other than you sign the exterior envelope. That's been changed to be tightened up that at the very least you have to add on the envelope either your state ID, which you can get for free, which looks like a driver's license, your driver's license number, or failing all that, at least the last four of your social security number. Doesn't seem like that suppresses anyone. So it's got to do with the whole trail of evidence, and as far as those new laws are concerned.
Sandy,
And yet,
I'm sorry, all of that.
yet the DOJ come in and filed suit.
Yeah, say again?
The United States Department of Justice has filed suit because of those laws.
Filed suit against the state?
Yes.
Okay. I know that there have been some issues where there have been whistleblowers or a whistleblower talking about the irregularities. Did they take place, obviously in Georgia, but did they take place over the presidential election or over probably an equally powerful election that you guys were involved with in January?
The best that I understand it, it's both.
Both.
But I haven't seen the final detail on that, and it's being worked on by the Secretary of State right now. And there's some pretty serious numbers there where it looks like there was significant ballot harvesting going on in the middle of the night. And the good news is there's video. There's not as much video as there should be, but there is enough that was gathered up under FOIA requests and a whistleblower who came forward and said, yeah, Mom told me I really should not have done this, so I need to clear my conscience and come talk to you folks about it.
Well, can you be specific as to what it is that he actually did do?
According to what we've heard publicly or seen publicly, he was paid $10 a ballot to drop ballots into the ballot boxes, which of course were unmanned, and the drop boxes, if you will. And at $10 a pop, he claims to have gotten $45,000 over the course of the two elections.
So that's 4,500 ballots.
Yeah.
One person.
Yeah. And he claimed further that there were some 240 odd other people that he knew of that were doing the same thing. So, the numbers get big in a hurry there. Where these ballots came from, how they were accounted for, there's still tons of questions. But at the end of the day, if he did 4,500 and there were just another 200 people doing 4,500, well, I don't know whether is that 90,000 ballots?
90,000.
And when you find out that the presidential race was only a difference of 11,000, you can say, gee, there's some irregularities there. And the state law in Georgia says if there are sufficient irregularities that are considerably larger than the margin of victory, the Secretary of State is bound to call a new election. Now that gets a little confusing too, if that happens, because you can't do anything with the presidential election, because you can't, because that goes through the Electoral College, and that's a done deal. Should the laws be changed in the future, Gee, I think so.
There's
But
no
what can-
do-over there, though.
Pardon?
There's no do-over for the presidential.
I guess somebody might try and push that through. Certainly, the only way that could ever happen is you'd have to get some ruling out of the Supreme Court. And, we would be to the next election by the time that ever happened anyway.
But in terms of your local elections in Georgia, the gubernatorial and the senatorial, which were.
Well, we were in an
really
off,
elected within
2020 was
several
an
points
off.
of each other, correct?
Yeah, well, the 2020 was an off year for the gubernatorial, so that wasn't an issue. What was at issue was both Senate seats.
That's,
And
yeah.
And there is prior precedence for, those level of elections to actually be overturned if sufficient irregularities are found one way or another, and either overturn the election or, depending on how much evidence you have, or require a new election.
Now, weren't they both like 52-48 or something like that? They were both very, very close.
Well, actually, in the general in November, the only one that was Purdue was running to retain his seat, and he won. But Georgia law requires you to, for you to win, you have to win 50% plus one.
Okay.
And there was enough breakage in third-party folks running that even though he won by like 2 percentage points, he didn't break 50. So then he had to go to the runoff in January, where the other runoff was, and they both lost there.
But very close.
Yeah, they were close, but a lot of people stayed home because they were. It was a turnout deal. That so the other thing besides the Dropbox fiasco that's going on right now is, for quite some time there's been activity in Fulton County, which is the heart of downtown Atlanta, basically, where there were, I believe, 6 poll workers who signed affidavits that basically put them in jeopardy of perjury if they were found to have said something in the affidavit that wasn't true. That said, they were working the polls and they saw ballots that came in that were supposedly mail-in ballots that didn't have any fold in them. And then they also, and there was a bunch of other things that made those ballots seem odd: the color of the paper, the weight of the paper, et cetera, et cetera. So there were all these ballots that people reported were seemed to be different than they should have been.
And those were presidential or the
Well, that was
senatorials as well?
all the races that were running. So it included the presidential and the Senate.
Now,
and
unfortunately, as always, we're running out of time. The significance, particularly of those 2 senatorial races in January, explain that to our viewers as to the implications of that on a national basis.
Well, the implications are in the November election. Again, the presidential numbers, it was around 8,000 plus or minus. I don't remember the exact number. But certainly, if that same difference was found in the senatorial race, and that would have been a done deal. And the Biden administration would never have been in position to get anything done, because it would have been 51-49 Republicans in the Senate. So the Republicans would have had a lot more to say about what was going on. And, Vice President Harris wouldn't have been breaking nearly as many ties. So that's huge. And long story short, there's been incredibly long litigation going on about these ballots, and all sorts of legalisms and yada, yada, yada. Meanwhile, they still haven't been able to get the court to agree that those ballots can be pulled out, and a group from both sides can actually review those physical ballots and see if the folks that made the affidavits were correct. And it would seem to me, and I'm not an attorney by any stretch, that if they find enough ballots that are supposedly mail-in ballots that don't have any folds in them, they can take those ballots and actually take whatever votes were in there and
deduct
discount
those
them.
from the total.
So there's a possibility there that Purdue and even some other people could find out that they won. And right now, the last court session on getting to see those ballots, for some reason that nobody quite understands, the judge decided that the folks that were asking to see them lacked standing. And I know that some of the people that are involved in this, and they've been doing voter integrity stuff in Georgia for like 15 years, and they are neither Republicans nor Democrats. They actually, most of them are from the Georgia Constitution Party. So they really don't have a horse in the race other than the truth. So every expectation is that when they get through the appeal on the standing thing, which is actually supported by Supreme Court cases in the past, that if they're going to be able to look those ballots.
Based on the significance of all of that, what we'd like to do is have you back on in another month or two. Let us know what's happening down there, because it's got national implications, it really does. And I thank you very, very much for enlightening us. It's been great to have you back again. Good seeing you as always.
Yeah.
And let's keep this going. This is important dialogue. This is not just something out in the hinterlands of Georgia. This affects everybody in this country. It really does. And I thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and it's not just Georgia. It's Arizona. It's Wisconsin. It's Michigan. It's Pennsylvania.
Sure.
There's all sorts of activity going on in all those states that could turn things in a different direction, despite the fact that